This is the Rutan Aircraft Flying Experience. We're a nonprofit organization that's focused on Burt Rutan's home-built designs. It is our 10th anniversary. It still boggles my mind that I've been doing this for 10 years. And what I appreciate more is for 10 years that you guys have been coming to my forums. But we're going to talk a little bit about what we've accomplished in the last 10 years and maybe what the next 10 years look like. Because I don't really know. I don't have that kind of crystal ball. But we've done a lot. It just amazes me what we've accomplished. So we are a legitimate 501c3. We're a legal entity down in the state of Texas. Sometimes it's easier to define who you are by defining who you're not, and we're not this. And I know some of you guys have seen some of these before, so thank you for putting up with it, but for the new people, this is important. With the very first year I started this, I named it the Rutan Aircraft Flying Museum, and even Bert said, "Where's the museum?" And I'm like, well, we don't have a museum. We don't have that's a museum takes a building, and air conditioning, electricity, all that stuff, and staff, and that's expensive. So we're kind of a flying museum. So we're not about airplanes on display, hanging from the ceiling in some building. We want to get our airplanes out in front of the public and make sure everybody understands that these things are still out there and they're relevant. So 10 years ago, I started this by getting a hold of this airplane that was, we call it the Cozy Jet. Greg Richter called it the Kerosene Dreams. I knew it was a real people magnet, and made a deal with the guy that had it at the time, flew it up here, and the EA was very gracious. That was one of the years that Bert came. He started coming about every 5 years, and he hadn't been here in actually a while, so in 2015 he showed up, and they stuck us all in Boeing Plaza, or back then it was Aeroshell Square. It was a really good time, and it kind of started the precedent of Bert coming every 5 years, but I couldn't believe the real estate that we had, and even though that was just Rutan Day and all the rest of those airplanes got scooted out of there, they let me stay the whole week right there. I had some prime real estate, and by Wednesday, like today, I had no voice and sold all 100 T-shirts that I brought with me, and just had a great time. Most of the people said I was crazy. A lot of people said you'll never get anybody to donate an airplane to you, and I wasn't sure that any of this would work, but I had to try. If you've read any of this stuff about RAFI and the history of it, the inspiration of it was the year before, 2014, I was walking down the flight line where I used to see hundreds of Easies. I mean, literally, some of you guys remember those days where the flight line was dominated by Rutan winglets, and I think I counted like 12. And I was like, well, where is everybody? So I started asking people, what's going on? And honestly, I hadn't been to Oshkosh in a while because of life took me away from things, and still flying my Very Easy. But some of the answers I got I didn't like. Some people said, well, it's a cycle of life. We had our time, and other airplane designs have taken over, and there's no product support and stuff like that. And so I started thinking about it, and I said, I want to do something about this. So I choose a nonprofit model because there is no money in this. Many people in the home-built industry have proven that. Bert said, a museum about me. That's pretty cool. I'm surprised no one's done that yet. And he said, good luck with that. So, but here we are 10 years later. We have grown to be literally a global organization. People all over the world are wearing our shirts, and I ask people from international places that come by and get a t-shirt, please send us a picture. This week already I've met people from all over the world. So we're having a great time, and I like this picture. There's even a guy in Russia flying a Q1 on skis. How cool is that? So I hear from him every once in a while. And so in the last 10 years, we've acquired a fleet of airplanes that just boggles my mind. We have 12 flying airplanes that have been donated to RAFI. Not all of them were flying when we got them, if you know the story about Lady Vi, which we'll cover a little bit. But some of them I literally got in and flew home. And that's just amazing. So this is a list of all the airplanes that we have. Not all of them are here, but we got a pretty good fleet. The objective of Rutan Aircraft Flying Experience was to acquire at least one flying example of every one of Bert's home-built designs, and we defined that as the airplanes that he sold plans for. And so if you look at the back of our T-shirt, it's about 6 airplanes. Very easy, the Long Easy, the Very Vegan, the Defiant, the Solitaire, and the Quickie. And we count the Quickie because he was involved in its development, and it's kind of a cool airplane. Honestly, anything white with a canard, we blame on Bert. So we're all totally inclusive, but that was kind of our focus at the time. And the organization's actually grown into things beyond that. And I always felt like the Solitaire was going to be the hardest one to find, and it kind of was. And Biggins, they were so rare. But it amazes me that now we are very, very close to accomplishing that goal. We have multiples of some models of the airplane, but that's fine. But ultimately, we're still trying to reach that goal of having at least one flying example of all of them. But we also have an inventory of stuff that still is just hard to believe. We've got all these airplanes that were either formerly flying airplanes, or actually all these were formerly flying airplanes, and then we have another inventory which I'm going to put up of unfinished projects, because it's unbelievable how many unfinished EZs out there. The RV guys like to brag that there's 12,000 RV kits out there, okay? Or 12,000 of them flying. I don't remember what they claim. But I can tell you right now, there's got to be at least, who knows how many EZs were ever built, because there's no way to measure that. But there's got to be 12,000 unfinished EZs out there. We get offered unfinished projects all the time. We call them brown airplanes. They're typically structurally complete, on the gear, engine mount hanging on the back, flight controls installed, and not a speck of micro on them. It's just like this brick wall. I was just talking to somebody about their Long Easy build, and I guess a lot of people just got to this point after building a whole airplane structure, and they went, now I got to put all this stuff on there and sand it. So we have unfinished projects that we'll probably never do anything with because we don't have the manpower. I hope one day we do as we grow. But if anyone's interested in that, just come over and talk to me sometime later, and we'll try and match you up. So that's a list here, and this is kind of how it works. The first airplane ever donated to us, flying airplane, was Jim Madsen Long Easy, and right after 2015, when I was at Oshkosh with the Koji Jet, that fall Terry Schubert got a hold of me. Terry Schubert, if you don't know, guys that don't know him, ran a Central Station newsletter. He's kind of a fixture in the canard world for a long time, and he was up in Michigan. And he said, hey, I know a guy that needs to get rid of a Long Easy. He's selling his house on an air park, and he's going in assisted living, and he hadn't flown the airplane in years, and he just wants it gone. And so that, who has the ability to just drop everything and go drive across the country and pick up something? So I reached out to the canard community. Harry Manville, I don't know if Harry's in here, a Defiant builder. He put together a team. Guys went out there, took the airplane apart, hauled it over to Harry's hangar and stored it for a while. Jim Madsen had flown that Long Easy a lot for a long time. It was a pretty airplane. It was an early example of good example of the early 80s, not spectacular, but very basic airplane. And finally we got it down to Covington and we got it flying. It has become the airplane that we use to transition train people. We have a little school we'll talk about later, but so we put these airplanes to good use. And then we got Martin Kennedy's airplane. This is another story that was, I think, pretty interesting. At first, I thought this was about saving the airplanes, okay? And then the Martin Kennedy airplane, we were reached out by his wife, Wanda, and I knew Martin from way back when. He was a dentist. He built a beautiful airplane. It won the Wright Brothers Award, and he had passed away, and it was sitting in Wanda's garage. And I was up at Oshkosh when Robert Harris and Lance Hooley said, well, we're not going to Oshkosh, but we'll run over there and pick up that airplane because it's in Indiana, not too far from Covington. And so middle of Oshkosh like that, the day that I knew they were going to go get it, I was waiting to hear from them, and finally I got tired of waiting, and I called up Lance, and I said, what's your status? Did you guys get the airplane? And the first thing he said was, never ask me to do that again. And I was like, what? And he kind of said it tongue-in-cheek, and he started explaining what happened. Then when they got there, in their mind, Robert, if you guys know Robert Harris, the jet guys, he's transported, oodles of EZs over the highway. And he said in their mind, they're just going there to pick up an airplane. When they get there, they had to deal with Wanda, and all of her emotions, because these airplanes, anybody in this audience has built anything like this, they know that, you guys know that these become part of your family, okay? And this is the first time this struck me that this was more about airplanes. And they're sitting on the couch with Wanda looking at photo albums while she's getting emotional and everything, and it took all day. And finally they got the airplane loaded up, and very compassionate with her and everything. And even, I haven't heard from her this week, but typically I'll hear from these people and say, how's my husband's airplane doing, or how's this, whatever, it did make it to Oshkosh. They stay connected to it, and that's hugely important because of what our mission is. So that's a picture of the airplane the way they found it, and it flies today. So we started looking at this differently, and you heard me talk about the Jim Madsen Long Easy, the Martin Kennedy Long Easy, the Dave Brown Long Easy. We don't call them the White Long Easy or 365 Delta Bravo. We name them after the builder. We call it memorializing the builder. Because that's became more important, the story of the person who built the airplane. The airplane's just a machine. It's just like a lawnmower, Yeah, it's kind of cool, but without this connection to the builder, what is it? It's just a machine. So things started kind of going in my head that made me realize I was way into something bigger than I thought it was going to be. So, and one of the other things that happened to me personally when this occurred was Tom Wright, before, when we didn't have any airplanes flying, he lent us his Long Easy. Tom's about this big. He had a canard shop in Somerset, Pennsylvania, and he retired, and he was trying to get the airplane down to Florida. And he said, go up there and get my airplane. He says, and you fly it around for a while and then bring it to me later and help promote Raffy. And I said, okay. And being a Texan, I went up there in April. There was still snow on the ground. And I said, forget this. I went back about end of May and got the airplane out. It was condition inspection was done, everything, and took it for a quick test flight and said, yeah, I think this won't kill me. And I was about to leave, and this lady comes out. I don't know her from Adam. And she walks up and doesn't say hi or anything. She walks up and says, I just want to touch it one more time. I'm like, what? Well, it's Tom's wife, his ex-wife. And again, the airplane, even though they'd been separated for years, was still part of that family. And we talked for a long time, and I thought about that a lot on a trip back to Texas. And I said, wow, this is kind of interesting, And I'm a guy, guys were not that emotional, but it really started sinking in that this was bigger than what I thought. And along the way back to Texas, I stopped in North Carolina to visit another family. So Tom's airplane actually enabled the donation of this airplane, the David Brown airplane. And another, the same kind of story. David Brown had passed away. The family had the airplane. And so I've stopped to visit him, and they were very happy to donate it. And this was the first airplane that I ever got in, literally turned the key and flew off after a big celebration at the airport because everybody loved Dave Brown. And he built a spectacular airplane. And one of the interesting things about this experience, again, from the emotional side of it, was they came up to me and said, listen, Dave had a Piper Tomahawk or something. He said he'd been to Oshkosh a lot, but he never flew his Long Easy to Oshkosh. And I was going to take the airplane from Greensboro, basically, straight to Oshkosh. It happened in July. And they said, would you take Dave with you? And I said, what? And they said, yeah, would you take his ashes? And so I flew in Oshkosh with Dave Brown in my back seat, and I stopped somewhere in Ohio to get gas or something, and I called back to Mike Brown, his nephew. Dave Brown had never had any kids, so his nephew Mike was like his kid, and he was the executor of the estate. And I said, Mike, how'd everybody do? He said, oh, they were fine. I said, good, because I was darn near crying when I left. And I was like, man, there's really something to this. So the Dave Brown airplane was our flying airplane, and it went everywhere. I got to take it to Cuba. And what's cool about that is Cuba's a country full of people who never gave up on their dreams. David Brown spent 30 years building that airplane. And I know I've talked to many people that are now still trying to build 30, 35 years later, but this was one of the first ones I ever encountered that took that long to build. And what's significant about that, again, as the Raffy evolved into something, we realized that this is more about never giving up on your dreams. So we've used that airplane to inspire a lot of people, and that's me landing in Cuba. And then a little while after that, we had another crazy airplane donated to us that I couldn't believe we got, and it was called a Gyroflug Speed Canard. And if you're familiar with these things, it's a German knockoff of the Long Easy. And Bert told me once, he goes, yeah, I know that guy. He didn't listen to me. It's really a kind of an interesting airplane. Trust me, it's no Long Easy. We call it the No Speed Canard because it's not really very fast. It's probably about 140 knots with wheel pants and been waxed and all that stuff. But it's got an O320 and MT constant speed prop. But we were stunned when this airplane was offered to us because we didn't realize that it even existed. And this is the world's only standard category Speed Canard. It has a standard airworthiness certificate, not a pink certificate like home builds do. It's just like a Cessna 172. We can rent it. And because it is perfectly suited for dual instruction, we started a flight school with it. We call it the Canard Flight Academy. It's down in Covington, Tennessee. And I teach in it. The thing's incredible. I mean, it's got great visibility. You know, I've tried to teach in the back of a Long Easy or Very Easy, and anybody who's been back there can tell you it's tough. Well, most of us only have a stick back there, if we're lucky. You can't see very good. It's really, really cramped. This thing, I can almost see into the front cockpit and see what the guy's doing. It flies 95% like a Long Easy. The 5% that it's not, well, we work around that. But it's been a great trainer, and I bet we're probably somewhere around 160 people that we've trained to fly a Long Easy in it. And some of you guys from way back when are going to go, well, what's the big deal? The airplane's not that hard. It's not that hard, but as you know, it's different. And the differences are enough that back in the day you checked yourself out, and that worked most of the time. Sometimes it did not. So we take away a level of anxiety from new Long Easy owners that was never available before. And one of my favorite stories about that is a guy named Russ Myrick's. If anybody's got a cozy and they know Russ, I tell guys that are about to finish their build, wait until you're done, till you have an airworthiness certificate, till you're looking at your airplane and you think there's nothing left to do for this airplane to fly. Then come see us, go through our program. It doesn't take very long. Go home, fly your plane. And Russ Myrick's came to Covington, and I asked him to fill out a little pilot information sheet, and somewhere along the line, because it took a while for him to get there, I forgot, and I asked him how much flight time he had, and he said 70 hours. And I went, oh my God, what's this going to be like? But he's a really sharp guy. He studied. He knew the numbers. He watched, read the book. This is before we had a training video. And I went and flew with him for the first flight, which is usually the first flight. We call it the wow flight, okay? Because most of us, if you weren't lucky enough to learn to fly in a Citabi or a glider or in the military, most of us learned to fly in something that sat side by side with doors, right? It's the first time you get in a Long Easy, it's like nothing you've ever been in, okay? You got a canopy, you got a retractable nose gear, you got a side stick. What is this thing, right? So the first flight's usually pretty short because most of the people I train sit there on the very first flight and go, wow, this is cool. Wow, this is great visibility. So we let the wows get out of the way, and then we focus on training. Russ went right through that. And after the very first flight, I never told anybody this before. I said, if you want to fly again, I'll go with you, but I feel like I'm taking your money, man. You got this. And so we flew another flight. It wasn't even an hour. I sent him home, and then 2 days later, he flew his Cozy Mark IV. He called me up and said it was a non-event. So those of you guys that did your first flight in the airplane you built and never flown one before, think of your anxiety level and then try to imagine what that'd be if you'd already gotten to do front seat time in somebody's airplane. Night and day difference. So that has been a great aspect of the Rutan Aircraft Flying Experience. Unlike a lot of Part 61 operations, we have a standardized syllabus. I got in trouble when Bud Davidson did an article on RAFI and Sport Aviation, I think last year. He was interviewing me, and I made this comment about our flight school. I said, we use a standardized syllabus. That way everybody gets the same thing. I don't care if Dick Rutan comes to fly one of our airplanes. He gets the same training. And then Bud published that in the magazine. So anyways, and then all that stuff's available on our website. We've now developed some training videos. We were at first hesitant to put these out there to the public because we didn't want somebody to watch one of our videos and go, oh, I'll watch the video on how to fly a Long Easy and I know how to do it. But they're really well produced. They're professionally produced. Takes you through the whole thing. And I was kind of firing them off to the people coming for training, say, watch this before you come. But we kind of backed off on that and they're open to the public, and you can go back and look at them. It covers the introduction to the speed canard and then how to fly the long easy using the Jim Madsen airplane, and we're really proud of them. So this picture right here is that guy, Brian McKinney, who's a graduate of our flight academy, and his airplane's sitting right out there, and he can tell you how it impacted his life. This is Tim Dyer, a retired Delta pilot, came through, wound up having his own he sponsored one of our airplanes and got his own long easy. And we've expanded the Canard Flight Academy down to Houston, where our operation has really grown, and we use a Cozy 3 down there. But as you guys know, a Cozy is called a Cozy for a reason. So we have this young lady here who weighs about 115 pounds that can fly with us big guys. And a Cozy is a pretty good trainer, especially if you're going to fly a Cozy. So we've also acquired another speed canard. This is an interesting story because it ties into something that's going to happen, actually is happening today and tomorrow. Winter before last, I got a call from an EA chapter in Michigan. Anybody in an EA chapter around Battleground, I think it is. Anyways, they go, hey, we got this speed canard. You guys interested in it? I'm like, tell me about it. And as far as I knew, there were 5 speed canards in this country. Only one standard category, the rest of them experimental, and one on the FAA registry was listed as a glider. I didn't know Gyroflug made gliders, so I kind of ignored it. Turns out it was this one, okay? And if you look at it, it's got a funny paint job, okay? And like, what the heck is this? And if you look closer, it says TRW on the side. And there's another sticker that says Electric Systems, and some brainiac painted the canopy. So I started digging deeper, and if you get on YouTube, there's some videos about these airplanes that TRW owned, and they did some kind of secret stuff with them because they're experimental and they're fiberglass and they can put things on them that, they were testing. And somehow it made it up to Michigan. The airplane's a total disaster. It needs a total rebuild, and it'll never be standard category, but it's still another speed canard, and it could supplement our training in some way. So we really hope to get that flying one day. And in 2019, going through the chronology of the last 10 years, this was the size of our fleet. And I was pretty proud of that. 2019 was a big year because that was another year that Bert came. And something happened that year that really, really floored me. Was around early May, I got an email from Dick Napinski here at EAA and said, hey, I'm going to tell you something you got to keep a secret, but we need your help. He said, we wonder if you could help us. And the secret was Burt Rutan was coming to Oshkosh. And that was May. Well, when's Oshkosh? End of July. And I said, what would you like us to do? He said, well, can you help us get airplanes? I said, yeah, we could drum up some interest, get airplanes here, get people here. But I said, I got a better idea. I'd like to fly in the air show. And they said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to do something that's never been done before. I want to put up all the different models of Burt Rutan's airplanes in front of the public, fly them out here, and have an announcer, narrator talk about them all and talk about the history of Burt Rutan. And that we nicknamed that the Rutan Reunion Flight. And the EAA surprisingly said, okay. And we did it. And that was 2019 was kind of the year that put RAFI on the map. And so we got almost every one of Burt Rutan's designs. The thing that we were short to fly was the Solitaire, because the only one we could find was Harold Bickford's, and it wasn't flying. But we even had the Catbird. We had a guy named Charlie Spinelli, brought his Vigan all the way from Tucson, and we flew in the air show. We had some great photo shoots, and that's a picture of a formation flight coming in over Oshkosh there. Burt was there. He was absolutely thrilled to see a Vigan flying again. And people that showed up and the volunteers, it was just a fantastic experience. And I'm telling you, flying in the Oshkosh Air Show has been a milestone event for me, and I've done a lot of things. And it got us on the cover of the Rolling Stone. I mean, this is it, man. How much better can you get like that? The problem is, for me, there's only one RAFI airplane in that right there, but that's just the coolest picture. We got Charlie Spinelli's Vigan, Leif Johnson's Very Easy, the Dave Brown Long Easy, and then the Catbird, okay? So, I mean, just an incredible thing, but for me, the bar was still get all the RAFI airplanes up there, as many as we could. So But it really, really kind of changed my perspective, because all of a sudden I realized that EA knows who we are, you know. And I'll tell you, one of the coolest things was when Bert said something about, oh, go see those RAFI guys, which one went, oh, he knows who we are. You know, he knows who I am, but he told me I was crazy back in 2015. So, and then the Vigan comes along. Charlie Spinelli donated his Vigan, the only Vigan flying in the world at the time. He was determined to donate it to the Smithsonian. And I like Charlie, but he really wanted to just brag that his airplane was in the Smithsonian. And the only thing that stopped that was COVID. He couldn't get it to the Smithsonian. Then he gives it to the Pima Air Museum. So if you ever go to Pima Air Museum, you'll see Charlie's Vigan hanging from the ceiling, you know, sentenced to death in a museum, because as you can tell, I'm not big on airplanes behind ropes or hanging from ceilings, okay? And so now the world had no flying Vigan. So, and I forget which, I think it was 2019, a guy named Scott James walked up to me right out there. Never met him before in my life, and he says, hey, will you be interested in a Vigan? And I said, oh, hell yeah. And he starts showing me these pictures and telling me the story. And so we went and meet him in Arkansas, and if you guys, anybody's been following Rafi and knows the story, it's just like an episode in Storage Wars. And we roll up this door, and we're like, holy cow, look at that, it's a Vigan. And it was a kind of a mess, but it was 90% done, 90% to go, right? So Harry Patterson started building this thing probably 40 years ago, and it was in really good shape. And Robert Harris and I went over there, and we donated it to us, and we loaded it up, and we're like, wow, that's pretty cool. And no sooner we got back to Covington, I couldn't stand it. I got a garden hose, and I cleaned the thing off. We stabbed the wings on. We said, man, that's a good-looking airplane. And we crawled all over it, and we're looking at the structure and everything. We said, this is a pretty good build. I think this one would fly. So then we stuffed it in a hangar, and it sat there for a while because Rafi doesn't have the money or the manpower to do things. But then somebody mentioned to me, this is the panel that was in it, and Harry Patterson he had built several airplanes, and he worked for Lockheed, I think. The guy knew airplanes. This thing's, man, the workmanship was fantastic, and that's what really impressed us. So somebody told me that the 50th anniversary of the Vigan was coming up. I said, really? Man, we got to get this thing in gear. So about a year and a half prior to the anniversary in Oshkosh 22, we started jumping on it and scraping together parts and pieces, and some people really facilitated, you know, its progress. One of the guys right there in Covington, Alan Blythe, had an Aero Canard with a 360 on the back, and he was putting a 540 on it, and he said, hey, my 360 is a good engine. I've been flying it on an Aero car, but like a lot of home builds, it doesn't have logbooks, whatever. Do you guys want it? We said, yeah, I know that engine. It's a good engine. So we wound up hanging it on the back of the airplane. This is Curtis Porter. He works for Delta. He would commute to Covington because he likes to do wiring, I guess. I don't know. That's kind of crazy. And he installed the whole GRT panel that was donated to us by Rick Hall. And we just started, you know, attacking this airplane. And before you know it, that's the engine. You know, even people that came in to go to Kennard Flight Academy, we had a couple, you know, they come in and maybe the winds were too high or whatever. I said, well, you all work on a Vigan, and I'd put them to work because, hey, we need help, you know. So we have a rule in Covington at Jet Guys that if you hang around long enough, we'll put a tool in your hand. So Evan and his wife worked on the Vigan. We got the engine hung on. We wound up building our own induction system. That's another presentation in itself. And we got it running. And I'm so proud of this aspect right here, because you guys that are builders know this. When you fill out all your paperwork to get your airworthiness certificate, there's a block there that says builder. And the FAA wants a name. They want a human being. Say, this person built this, because that's the whole idea, right? Experimental aviation, education, all that stuff. And I pushed the DAR, and I said, look, this wasn't built by one person. This was built by an organization. And so if you look carefully, where it says builder, there's not enough space, but it says Rutan Aircraft Flying Experience. And that was huge to me, because Rafi built this airplane, not just me. Now all these volunteers got together and built it, and it was just a different approach to it, and it really, really thrilled me. This is one of the cool pictures from the flight test program. Let me go back to the date. Where's the date on this? Okay. The 50th anniversary was 2022 here at Oshkosh when Bert showed up in 1972. Look at the date of the issuance of the airworthiness certificate, June 13th. The airplane had never flown before. I'd never flown a Vigan before, okay? And it's June 13th, and when is Oshkosh? Like 5 weeks later. And how many hours do we got to put on that airplane? 40. And by God, we went to work. And this is one of the test flights. Down there at Jet Guys, we do things pretty professionally. We ran a flight test program, you know, very much like you guys probably do. And we started going through things, and I could talk about that all day long. But we got our 40 hours on the airplane, okay? And we arrived here, and I was talking to, I don't know, Jim Mayer, one of these guys. He pulled up, and I said, man, you're not going to believe it. We flew 40 hours in the last 5 weeks and just to get here. And he goes, that seems to happen a lot with you home builds. It was a big deal. And when we got here, the overwhelming response, again, just was something I didn't imagine. The EA was all over it, and we got on the cover of Rolling Stone again. And the story of Ready Vi, to me, is very, very, very personal because the involvement of the volunteers that stepped up to make this happen. Without that, this airplane wouldn't be probably flying today. So moving on, we also have a formation program. We've developed that over the years. If you guys were around back in '95, the glass overcast, we put 36 Easies up into some kind of gaggle formation to celebrate the 20th anniversary. Ken, I know you were in that. It was scary in hell, but it worked, you know. But things change. Now if you want to fly a formation here at any air show in Waverly Airspace, you have to have a FAST card or an FFI card. None of us had that back then in '95. But and it wasn't just thrown together. A guy named Norm Howell started like a year prior and had training camps and everything, and it worked out really well. But of course, our federal government, now you have to have some kind of qualification. So we started a program in 2018 to start getting canard pilots to start flying more formation like the RV guys do. And it has grown tremendously also. Our goal was to fly a 50 plane formation on the 50th anniversary of the Very Easy. Obviously that's not going to happen, but we're still plugging away because the 50th anniversary of the Long Easy is coming up. So maybe we'll have enough formation flyers by then. If you're interested in that, go to the FFI website. We actually have a document on there called the Canard Supplement. It talks about how we do things differently as Canards compared to the RV guys. And get involved, come to our clinics, and we'll get you into formation. Jim Springer, I don't think he's made it. He's the head of our formation stuff. He started this Facebook page called Easy Formation Crew. That's where they publicize all the events and stuff like that and communicate about it. It's a lot of fun. It really helps improve your skill set. I can tell you that right now. If you're flying, you know, a couple feet away from another airplane, you really got to be paying attention. So. Part of our growth also, we have kind of our center of mass has always been Covington, Tennessee, mostly because Robert Harris and the Jet Guys are there. They're real supportive of what we do, and it just kind of just kept growing and growing there. We got 4 T hangars there, and then I acquired this big hangar here. It's 8,000 square foot hangar with office spaces and a workshop in it, and we're trying to get the flight school base there and a maintenance shop and some other stuff. It's a real benefit to us because it's already full of canards and gives us a better place to operate from. So the problem is it's all these hangars cost money, right? One other reason to be in Covington is that hangar, if it was in Houston, would probably be $5,000 a month. In Covington, it's $1,000 a month. So it's in the middle of nowhere, but again, we can afford it, barely. But 501c3s, they don't exist unless you get volunteerism or donations. That's how we are. We have a whole lot of people that do come out and volunteer. This is Bob Stevens working on a Cozy Jet, which should be flying real soon. But down in Houston, and a really cool thing has happened. Of course, Houston's the 4th largest city in America. You'd think there'd be more volunteers than there would be in Covington. Obviously, there is. And so we wound up falling into an opportunity to get a big T hangar. This is like a King Air size hangar. And at first, this was the hangar, and it really only had Dave Brown in it, and that was it. And then some other aircraft that we rented space to help pay the bills. And bit by bit, they started going away until all of a sudden now it's overrun with canards. So if you look at that picture, it's kind of a recreation of that one of 2019. This is our fleet size, but this is just the fleet in Houston now. So we have a big presence in Houston, lots of volunteers, lots of people, Have you ever seen a hangar like that? Isn't that cool? So lots and lots of stuff. But then another thing I'm really proud of is it's really hot in Houston, and especially in the summertime. This was the hangar. It's kind of a mess with all the airplanes out. In this corner right here, this hangar's got like this little cubby hole off to the side. It's like a little garage or something. And that's just the way they laid them out. And I started getting this idea that we could turn that into something, because that's where our workshop was. But this picture is everything pulled out of there and stacked up to one side, and the airplane's gone, because we approached the city with an idea, and they approved it, and we started building this thing. And it's a building standing inside of a building, because the city said, we don't care what you do as long as it's not attached to the hangar. And you can't get volunteers to come work on your airplanes if it's 105 degrees in the hangar, 100% humidity. I mean, that says Houston. I'm used to it. You guys are all fanning yourself. I'm like, hey, what's the problem, right? But this was 100% built by volunteers, 100% built with donations, and we started working on it. And we have something that nobody, at least at Ellington, has, and it's just really, really cool. We have an air-conditioned workshop downstairs. We can stick 2 Very Easies in there with the wings off, obviously. And upstairs is like a briefing room, lounge, kind of office, and it's all air-conditioned and heated. And that really became a game changer for us, because all of a sudden, we had the place at Ellington that everybody wanted to hang out. There's a refrigerator full of beer downstairs, and there's air conditioning and a couch upstairs. Where are you going to go take a break? And then our volunteer membership started growing. Where's George? George, wake up, George. This is George Choquette, who's the Ellington Canard base leader, and a bunch of the volunteers that helped build that. Look at the smiles on these people, man. I'm just thrilled. And really, we can accomplish anything. It just takes time, effort, and money. And you may have been hearing that the 50th anniversary of the Very Easy is this year, right? We got these cool 50th anniversary T-shirts. And if you're here last year, you're saying, well, wait a minute. I thought the 50th anniversary of the Very Easy was last year. Well, it depends on who you ask. The EA is celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Very Easy this year, even though we celebrated it last year, because in their mind, the Very Easy came to Oshkosh, and then the kind of home builder version with the O200 came here in 75. And that's when Bert started selling plans in what, early 76, something like that, okay? No, you're wrong. You're wrong. He said the prototype is 75. No, and here's why. Early last year, I don't bug Bert too much. He's retired. We're the Rutan Aircraft Flying Experience, but we're really not about Bert Rutan. We're about the airplanes, the people that built them, and of course we adore Bert. But this isn't an organization that is all about Bert. It's all about everything at Bert Rutan. But I keep I kind of drop him a line every once in a while. And early last year, I sent him an email, and it kind of, you can't read that, but I was just basically updating him stuff on the Vigan and stuff like that. And I said something about, I hope you're planning, I said, hope all's well, hope you plan on being in Oshkosh in 2025. I'm really beating a drum with the EAA to make 2025 the 50th anniversary of the Very Easy and the biggest Rutan party ever, okay? I thought that would make him happy, right? And he fires back an email and says, don't beat that drum, because the development of the Very Easy, as well as moldless composite structure method, was done in 74, not 75. Bert said it. You can argue Bert, okay? And I plan on being in Oshkosh this July to celebrate the real 50th milestone, okay? Remember in 2019, I got the message from EA in May. Thank God this was February 6th, because in my mind, I had 18 months to set up the 50th anniversary of the Very Easy and the biggest Rutan party there ever been at Oshkosh. And Bert just changed everything. And then he CCs me on an email to the EA and says, Bert's a yes, we're coming to do this. And I'm like, oh my God. And I'll tell you what, all of a sudden I went into panic mode, because I figured, I just retired from my airline job. I figured I got 18 months to plan this. I'll retire from my airline job. We'll have this great thing at 50th anniversary at Oshkosh right after that. And all of a sudden I'm like, woo, I got to start getting my stuff together because I don't want to be crammed into like 2019 like I did. And so what does it take? Well, I tell you what, it takes a lot of dedicated people, okay? And we'll talk about this young lady here in a little bit. I know it's hot. I'm trying to talk as fast as I can. This is Riley Remar. Incredible story. She's the first person I have called when I realized what was going to happen last year. And the reason is we were standing over there the year before, and in the middle of a crowd of people, George walks up and says, "You got to meet this young lady." Riley had come over to the Cozy build. She was 21 years old, going to Embry-Riddle, and she said, "Hi, I'm Riley. I have a Very Easy." You do? You know? And she had bought a Very Easy from somebody off of Facebook, and if I ever meet that person, I'll choke them with my bare hands, but you'll find out why later. But her dad used to have a Very Easy and then a Long Easy, and she loved the airplanes. And on her own, she just went out and bought this Very Easy. And she says, "Wow, that's really cool." So we got to know her, and I started thinking about who's going to help us for this 50th anniversary. And I said, how cool it would be to have Riley flying in the air show for the 50th anniversary of the Very Easy in her own Very Easy. So I called her up, and she said, "Man, I'm nowhere near, my airplane's nowhere near ready." So we told her, I said, get your airplane and bring it down to Covington, and that's a story I'll tell in a minute. But I started collecting people because I said, this is a really unique opportunity. I want to have the rock stars of the canard world in this, okay? And so I started calling people to get the airplanes and the people. And the other thing the EA wanted, in 19 we had one-of-a-kind airplanes like the Vigan and the Herald Solitaire, and we had one of them. That's all we could do. And we put them in Boeing Plaza back then, and then when it came time to fly in the air show, we had to pull them out, and then we had to put them back in, and EA said, we don't want to do that. So I actually said, I got a better idea. We're going to collect two groups of the same airplanes. If there was two Vigans, I'd like to have two Vigans, but two Defiants, two Long Easies, two of everything, so we could have airplanes on display in Boeing Plaza and airplanes flying in the air show and minimize the going back and forth. So I got a hold of Harold. I said, bring your Solitaire back to Oshkosh. Let's get it flying. And got a hold of Keith Welch. Keith Welch flew with us in 2019. Keith Welch has been flying this Quickie for, 40 years, fearlessly. He flew that Quickie with an Onan engine from Terre Haute, Indiana, to Oshkosh in 2019. I said, man, you got some big ones. And then when I called him up about this, he goes, yeah, it's good to go. I fly it all the time. And he flew it back. Most Quickie guys don't leave the pattern. Okay, and you know why. So, but Keith came back to fly with us. At the time, Izzy had just gotten that Norwegian Defiant. What a cool story is that? Okay, brought it over from the North Atlantic. So I said, Izzy, would love to have you flying with us. And then, of course, our beloved Ken Swain, okay? Leif Johnson. We had room for two Very Easies in the air show, so I got a hold of Leif. He's one of our formation guys, an F-15 guy, fellow Southwest pilot. I needed some leadership to help with it. And I said, Leif, I need your help, because I knew I'd be flying a Vigan. Jim Price, record holder, right? I mean, these are rock stars of the canard world. Steve Sorensen flew his Defiant to Australia, and it was a tough decision to ask who was going to fly and who's just going to be the display. So I asked everybody, which would you like to do? And some people were like, hey, flying in the air show's a little much for me, so I let them make the choice. Gary Hertzler, okay, another record holder, a Very Easy, it's been flying forever. Zach Reeder, the catbird guy. And I don't have a picture of Trace Clemens with Boomerang, We're going to have all these airplanes flying in front of the air show. And when you start looking at it, the EA said we're going to give you 15 or 12 minutes in the air show. Well, how do you get all those airplanes in there? You start making a spreadsheet and you realize you got to launch these guys 5 seconds apart or something like that. The planning was insane, okay? So if you've never done air shows, I do a lot of them. This is kind of what you're dealing with. Trying to get airplanes in there and get everybody educated in a flight that I'm probably the only guy that has ever done an air show before in my life, okay, in the group. So most air show teams, they practice and practice and practice. And how do I get 6 or 7 or 8 airplanes to do this when we all live all over the country, okay? There's just no way to do all that stuff. So, there really wasn't time. So we practiced it the way you used to do in skydiving, call it dirt diving. We all got here and we walked it through. I said, guys, let's go through the timing. Let's figure out how we're going to do this. We were pushing real hard for what's called an airborne start, where we launch all the airplanes off 927, take them up behind the crowd and let them orbit out there. And then when the time comes in our slot in the air show, fly them over the crowd over here above 1,000 feet, and everybody descend down into their little orbit altitude. The problem was the air show's written years in advance, okay? And when this happened, 2019, it was even harder for them to disrupt the air show. But when I was talking to Rick Larson, we would have these meetings. I think that's might be the next slide or one of these slides where here I am, just nobody, Richard Raffi guy, and I'm in these Zoom meetings with the head muckety-mucks of EAA trying to sort all this stuff out. And the first act of last year's air show is the NORAD demonstration. Has anybody actually ever watched that? Yeah, I get it. And I pointed that out to him. I said, look, I was just down in Sun and Fun. They did the NORAD demonstration. I paid attention. There was nobody paying attention at all. Why do we have to do this? They said, well, we're kind of compelled to do that. I don't know if the government makes them do whatever. But because there's an F-16 zinging around chasing an Apache or something like that, and an announcer talking about what to do in case you get intercepted and nobody's paying attention anyways, the airborne start, they said, we just can't have you guys up there with this F-16 guy zinging around out there. So we wound up doing a off-the-runway deal, which eats up your slot time. But it still worked out really, really good. Everybody did a fantastic job. The EA loved us. We got our time slot expanded, I think, to 18 minutes. We had 2 announcers up there in the stand that did a fantastic job. And that's kind of one of the things that I've always wanted to do is make this presentation. The problem for me is that we only get to do this when Bert's here. And I'll tell you, Bert confided in me last year. He said, because I asked him, I said, you're coming back next year, aren't you? And he said, no, I think this is my last trip. He's 82. One of the reasons that he got in so late was Rob Shearer flies him around in Starship. They can't really go up the altitudes that they need to get extended range because Bert's on oxygen. And there were a lot of things that we had this air show demonstration that Bert wasn't even there because he didn't get there till 5 in the evening. And when I was talking to the EA, they had all these grandiose plans on how it was going to work, and really none of it really worked out the way we'd planned. And the air show part just kept changing. But things are still good, okay? One of the things I like is the EAs allow us to kind of commandeer this corner over here. We call it Easy Street. This is Brian McKinney's. He comes in early and puts that up there. And I asked him one time, I said, hey, what's the chances of changing that from Ide Street to Easy Street? And they said, well, we think Mr. Ide's still alive, so we're not going to do that. So anyways, and then last year, you guys may not be aware, there was a big ceremony that they commemorated one of the streets in Camp Scholler to Rutan Way. So that was great. We got asked to help with that. They really didn't want like 10,000 people down there. So they said, hey, can you get together about 30 or 40 or 50 people and go down there and have a little. So it was kind of like a private thing, and really, really enjoyed it. And then Bert came down. When he gets here, everybody wants him. They're tugging on his sleeve left and right. He's got an entourage going around. And then he did the same thing in 2019. He came up down there and literally spent the afternoon just walking around, looking at the airplanes, talking to people, talking to me. We talked about the Vigan a lot. He was absolutely thrilled to see these airplanes still out there. Had a great time. But I'm going to go back to Riley because remember I was telling you about how I never really thought about the people aspect of this thing. So there are a lot of gray hairs in this audience. I'm going to turn 65 on Saturday. I've been doing this a long time. And this kind of segues into my talk about the next 10 years. I contacted Riley and said, hey, I want you to fly in the air shows. She's a 21-year-old girl with about 700 hours total time. She was a flight instructor and all. Never flown a Very Easy. Her Very Easy, she said, was nowhere near ready to fly. And I said, well, why don't you think about something? Why don't you and your dad, they live up Poplar Grove. It's kind of a Kennard family because her dad owned one. Now she owns one. She's in love with the design. He misses his airplane. I said, why don't you bring that thing down to Covington? So I talked to Robert, and I said, hey, can you help us out? So they did. But they didn't do it till April 27th. When is Oshkosh? Okay? Riley and her dad show up. They roll up the door in a box truck. We look at this very easy, and everyone went, ooh. And we get it out. We sit down with Robert. He goes, what's this airplane need? And she says, well, my gear is loose, and I don't have an instrument panel. And this and this and this and that. And Robert goes, yeah, that might take 2, maybe 3 weeks. We can do that. Well, you ever heard the phrase project creep? Okay. When we got this airplane in the shop, from the time we unloaded it, 2 hours later, it's upside down. This is a Saturday, so there's a lot of the jet guys' buddies are hanging around there. And we handed Riley a fine tool and said, here, cut open the belly of your airplane. And she went, what? And we went, and they attacked it. They attacked this airplane. The gear came out. Everything came out. But by the end of the next day, that airplane was gutted. There wasn't a wire in it. There wasn't a piece of tubing in it. Some of the flight controls was out. These guys just attacked it. And then they turned to her and said, okay, here's what you got to do. She went, okay. Now, Riley actually, she told me, she goes, I bought the airplane because I really wanted to learn how to work on it, okay? So she did. And she slept on Robert's couch. That picture that you saw, she slept on Robert Harris's couch until Oshkosh. She left one time for a week to go home. And we put her to work, and she was absolutely having a ball. And I was having a ball because I'm sitting there realizing this is the future, guys, right here. If we don't get young people like this involved to this level, we're doomed, you know? And it was an education that she could not buy. And one of my favorite stories is one night, we get in a car, Riley and I, and we're headed back to Robert's house. I rent a room from him, been doing it for 10 years, and that's why she slept on the couch, because she's not getting in my bed. And I looked at her and I said, what time is it? And she goes, 9:30 or something like that. I said, what time did we get here this morning? She said, about 8. And I said, you remember that? We've been doing this for how long? She goes, weeks. I go, you remember that? When people ask you what it took to get your airplane flying, you tell them 14-hour days every day for 2 months. And that's the way it was. It was exhausting. And we got her airplane finished. The sad part, it's a longer story, but this is why I'd like to choke the guy who sold the airplane. I was out flying a trip. Robert calls me and says, hey, we can't get oil pressure out of Riley's 0200. I go, what are you doing? He said, well, we're cranking it. I said, you started? He goes, no. Because you got to start it. You're not going to get oil pressure out of an 0200 at starter RPM. So 30 minutes later, or my next stop, I looked at my voicemail and they called me. I called them back. He goes, yeah, we're good. We got 40 PSI. All right. The airplane had gone through, wiring, new instrument panel, landing gear fixed, the engine's back on. We chucked that SkyTech. You guys know what I feel about that. We put a B&C on there. And I'll go out there to do the first test flight on her airplane for her. And 15 minutes later, landed, and I wanted to cry. The airplane had 40 PSI when I started it up. It had 30 PSI by the time I got to the runway. By the time I landed, it had 10. And we did everything I knew what to do. And remember, I'm a Formula One air racer. I know I can build an 0200 in my sleep. I knew everything I knew how to do to get oil pressure out of that engine, short of pulling the accessory case off, and there just wasn't time. This is like 10 days before Oshkosh. And we messed with it. Finally, we said, forget that. We had another very easy in that big hangar. We said, Riley, you're going to fly that one in the air show. It was Dennis Perdusky's old airplane that we'd refurbished and wound up with us. And so Garmin panel, nose lift, all this stuff, nothing like her airplane. And we got her. She'd already been through the Kennard Flight Academy, and I said, get in that very easy and go fly. And I said, just put hours on it, get used to it. And about the second day of that, she comes to me and just blew me away. She says, I really appreciate what you're doing. But the idea was for me to be at Oshkosh with my airplane, because that's my airplane. And that's not my airplane. She goes, I'd be perfectly happy just having my airplane on a static display and standing in front of it and telling everybody this story. And I thought about it. I said, wow. I would have never thought of that. And then she played a dirty trick on us because she got tops. When the airplane left Covington, it was white. And she gets it here and puts all these pink butterflies and stuff on it. You know, what else do you expect? But it was awesome. It was absolutely awesome. And that's what she did. She stood by the airplane and she talked to people, and it was a great, great story. And so, like I said, the mission of Rutan Aircraft Flying Experience has been changing. At first I thought it was about airplanes. Then I realized about people. And now it's all these things and the future. If you haven't seen this article, EA did this great article on her, okay? This is it, guys. Look around the room. We're all old, okay? We're 10-year anniversary of Rutan Aircraft Flying Experience. Tomorrow we're going to talk about the next 10 years. And tomorrow it's at 9 o'clock in Forum 11. I got 2 guest speakers coming that are going to surprise you. They're going to have cool things to say. And I'm going to talk more about what Izzy just did, okay? But if we don't do something, it's all going to fade away. And Riley's not here this year because she's now first officer for SkyWest. How cool is that? So, huh? No, she's an airline. She's a junior airline pilot. Ken, she didn't have any time. No, they needed to pull that engine apart, and what they did, her and her dad split the case, and it's not that bad inside. It's just the oil pump, you know, and some loose bearings. It's just fine. But she's a brand new airline. Do you think she's got any time? She's sitting reserve in San Francisco. So, you know, so welcome to the airlines. So that's really it, man. I am so proud to have drug this out for 10 years. I'm so proud that you guys sat through this in the heat. But really, we got another 10 years to go at least. I got everything to go, but the next 10 years are the most important. We've established ourselves. Rutan Aircraft Flying Experience, to me, is the Rutan organization for the future. Okay, I love COBA to death, Canard Owner and Builders Association. They put out a great newsletter, but COBA is inwardly focused. It's about the people that have the airplanes. They have a lot of technical articles and stuff like that, and flight reports and all this cool pictures. But they're really not focused outward. If we don't get more people, if we don't get new people, if we don't get young people involved, you know, it's going to keep going away like in 2014 when I realized it was going away. So I don't take any credit for us still being here, just, you know, throughout all this, but I like to think we've had an impact. But the real people that are going to have an impact are y'all. I can't keep doing this. Matter of fact, when I retire tomorrow, Saturday, when I turn 65, I'll not only be no longer an airline pilot, I'll no longer be the president of RAFI. I got to step down. Somebody else has to take this torch and run with it. It's been great. So in the meantime, help us out by buy T-shirts. Buy a lot of damn T-shirts because we need money. It is the 50th anniversary of the Very Easy. We got 50th anniversary T-shirts that we had last year. We got more of them this year, and we're gonna press on. We're gonna make this happen, folks. But I can't do it alone. I need everybody's help, and every one of you guys, whether you're involved with RAFI or not, okay, are by default, if you're a Rutan Canard guy, a representative of the future of this thing. So I drug this on for 10 years. The rest is up to you. Come to the forum tomorrow because we're going to talk about some pretty cool stuff. We're going to have some input from people in the industry about what they think our next 10 years might look like if we don't really start doing things. So I'm not going to spill any beans on that, but I invite you to come out 9 o'clock over in Forum 11. And we'll also talk about Izzy. He brought in a very special velocity, but I don't know where Izzy gets his energy. And right now he's going back to Maine to get this other very special airplane that we resurrected, and he's going to bring it back in tomorrow. Guy's incredible. But that's kind of where we're at. Happy 10th anniversary, folks. Thank you very much for coming.